The fluorescent lights of Mercy Valley Hospital hummed with that peculiar frequency that exists only in places where sleep goes to die. 2 in the morning. The graveyard shift. The time when the world outside faded into darkness, and the emergency room became its own strange universe of beeping monitors, antiseptic smells, and the quiet desperation of people clinging to life. Evelyn Thorne was on her hands and knees, not in prayer, not in surrender, but scrubbing the linoleum floor of exam room 4 with the kind of methodical precision that spoke of muscle memory older than most of the doctors on staff. Her hands trembled as they gripped the mop handle, a fine, almost imperceptible shake that made the soapy water ripple in the bucket beside her. To anyone watching, and several nurses were, it looked like the tremor of age, of weakness, of a woman whose body was betraying her in the slow, indignant way that bodies do when they cross into their 6th decade. They didn't know the tremor was a lie. 22 years ago, those same hands had been rock steady as they cut into a man's chest under a sky filled with tracer fire. The sand of Kandahar had turned to mud beneath her knees as arterial blood pumped against her palms. Sergeant Marcus Cole, 23 years old, too young to die in a desert half a world away from home, but he had died anyway. The flashback lasted only 3 seconds. A burst of sound, the crack of gunfire, the metallic taste of adrenaline. Then it was gone, and Evelyn was back in Ohio, surrounded by the smell of industrial cleaner and the low murmur of the night shift. She stood slowly, one hand on the small of her back, affecting a slight limp as she straightened. The limp was also a lie. Her back was fine. Her knees were fine. At 58, Evelyn Thorne was in better physical condition than most men half her age, but here in this place she needed to be invisible. She needed to be harmless. She needed to be exactly what they expected. A washed-up veteran grateful for a low-wage night shift job, mopping floors and changing bedpans. The automatic doors at the ambulance bay whooshed open, admitting a blast of November cold and the acrid smell of cigarette smoke. Doctor Garrett Sterling strode through, trailing an entourage of residents like ducklings following a swan. He was 38, impeccably groomed, with the kind of angular jawline that belonged in cologne advertisements rather than emergency rooms. His white coat was pristine, tailored. His shoes probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly rent. He stopped mid-stride when he saw her. Thorne. His voice carried across the ER with the casual authority of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. 8 people turned to look. The night shift skeleton crew. 2 nurses, 3 residents, an orderly, a security guard, all witnesses. Evelyn kept her head down. "Yes, Dr. Sterling? My coffee is cold." She looked up slowly. He was holding a paper cup from the break room, steam still visibly rising from the lid. "I just poured that 3 minutes ago, doctor. It should still be—" "Are you arguing with me?" The question hung in the air like a threat. One of the residents, a young man fresh out of med school, looked uncomfortable. The others simply watched with the blank expressions of people who had learned not to get involved. "No, doctor," Evelyn said quietly. Her voice had the rasp of disuse, of someone who had trained themselves to speak as little as possible. "I apologize. I'll get you a fresh cup." Sterling took a deliberate step closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, expensive, aggressive, the kind that announced itself before he entered a room. "You were hired to serve, Thorne, not to think, not to question, to serve." He paused, looking her up and down with open disdain. "And fix that limp when you walk. You look pathetic." He dropped the cup into the trash bin beside her mop bucket. The coffee was still hot enough to splatter. Droplets hit Evelyn's scrubs, leaving dark stains that bloomed like bruises. She didn't flinch. "Yes, doctor." Sterling turned away, already dismissing her from his thoughts, resuming his conversation about a case with one of the residents. Something about diagnostic protocols. His voice faded as he moved toward the physician's lounge, leaving Evelyn standing alone beside her bucket of dirty water. Bethany Frost, the night shift charge nurse, appeared at Evelyn's elbow. She was 28, blonde, with the kind of manufactured prettiness that required 2 hours of preparation each morning. Her scrubs were a size too small, deliberately. Her makeup was perfect even at 2 in the morning. "Sterling's right, you know," Bethany said, her voice just loud enough for the others at the nurses' station to hear. "You only got this job because of the veteran quota, diversity hire. The hospital had to meet their numbers." Another nurse, younger, laughed. Not a full laugh, just a quick exhalation of amusement. Enough to show alignment. Enough to wound. Evelyn said nothing. She picked up the trash bag from the bin, tied it off with economical movements, and carried it toward the disposal room. Her limp was pronounced now. Her shoulders hunched. She was 58 years old and invisible. Perfect. The thing about being invisible is that people forget you can see them. Evelyn moved through the emergency room like a ghost, her mop and bucket granting her access to spaces where the real work happened. The trauma bays, the supply closets, the medication rooms. She cleaned slowly, methodically, while around her the machinery of modern medicine churned through its nightly rotation of misery. But her eyes missed nothing. At 2:45 a.m., she was mopping near Trauma Bay 2 when she saw Dr. Sterling reviewing a patient chart. He was frowning, his pen tapping against the clipboard in that particular rhythm that spoke of uncertainty disguised as authority. The patient was a 67-year-old woman. Chest pain, elevated troponin. Classic presentation for acute coronary syndrome. The chart showed Sterling had ordered a standard EKG and was planning to admit her for observation. But Evelyn could see from where she stood 30 feet away, pretending to wring out her mop, that something was wrong with the woman's left arm. A subtle swelling. Discoloration. The patient kept trying to move it, wincing each time. Compartment syndrome, not a heart attack. A vascular emergency in the arm, probably from an IV infiltration earlier in the evening. If left untreated, the woman would lose the limb. But Sterling was so focused on the cardiac workup that he hadn't even examined the arm. Evelyn knew she should say something. She also knew exactly what would happen if she did. So she said nothing. She finished mopping. She moved to the next room. And she made a mental note to check on the patient again in an hour, when Sterling would likely be elsewhere, to see if the condition had worsened enough that even he couldn't miss it. This was the compromise she had made. This was the price of invisibility. At 3:15, Nolan Parker, one of the few male nurses on staff, found her in the supply closet restocking gauze. "You okay, Evelyn?" His voice was low, kind. At 32, Nolan still possessed that rare quality of genuine empathy that the hospital hadn't yet beaten out of him. He was one of the only people on staff who spoke to her like she was human. "I'm fine, Nolan. Thank you for asking." "Sterling's an asshole." "Doctor, Sterling is under a lot of pressure," Evelyn said carefully. "Running the night shift is difficult. That's not an excuse to treat you like garbage." Nolan shook his head. "I don't know how you put up with it." Evelyn smiled. It was a small, tired smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm just grateful to have a job at my age." It was the response they expected, the response of a woman who knew her place. Nolan looked like he wanted to say more, but the intercom crackled to life. "Code Blue, room 312. Code Blue, room 312. Nolan was gone in an instant, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum as he sprinted toward the stairs. Evelyn listened to the thunder of footsteps above her head, the muffled shouts, the organized chaos of a resuscitation in progress. She went back to stocking gauze. Invisible. At 4 in the morning, the universe gave Evelyn a gift. Mr. Harrison. He was 72 years old, admitted 3 hours earlier with pneumonia. Retired Marine Corps. The kind of man who still stood at attention when the national anthem played, even when no one was watching. His medical history showed deployments that spoke of a different era, a different war. Evelyn was cleaning his room when his eyes opened. They were sharp despite the fever, the kind of eyes that had seen things. Terrible things. the same kinds of things that lived in Evelyn's own nightmares. "You were military," he said. Not a question, a statement. Evelyn paused, her hand on the mop handle. "A long time ago, Mr. Harrison." "Marines?" "Navy. But I worked with Marines. Good people." Harrison's lips twitched into something that might have been a smile. "The way you stand, the way you move. Most people wouldn't notice, but I do." He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. When he caught his breath, he looked at her again. "Why are you here? Cleaning floors?" "It's honest work." "That's not an answer." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the sky was still dark, but there was a quality to the darkness that suggested dawn was waiting just beyond the horizon. The first birds were starting to sing. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "the hardest thing isn't fighting. It's coming home." Harrison nodded. He understood. Of course he understood. Men like him always did. "What was your specialty?" he asked. "Combat medic." "How many tours?" "3." Harrison whistled softly. "And now you're mopping floors while some Harvard punk treats you like dirt." "Dr. Sterling is—" "Don't," Harrison interrupted. "Don't make excuses for him. Men like that, they've never been tested, never been in a situation where their credentials don't matter, where it's just them and the mission and the very real possibility of death." He coughed again. "You've been tested. I can see it in your eyes. Whatever you survived, it was real." Evelyn said nothing, but something in her chest, some tight, clenched fist that had been closed for 14 years, loosened just a fraction. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison." "For what?" "For seeing me." The call came at 4:47 a.m. Dispatch radio crackled through the ER speakers. "Mercy Valley, we have a Code 3 inbound. ETA 4 minutes. Single vehicle MVA. Rollover, male, approximately 32 years old. Significant chest trauma. BP 80/50 and dropping. Tachycardia at 130. Patient is conscious but in severe respiratory distress." The emergency room transformed. Bethany Frost moved to the phone calling for the trauma team. Nolan Parker wheeled the crash cart toward Trauma Bay 1. The residents scrambled, pulling on gloves, checking equipment. Dr. Sterling emerged from the physician's lounge, his hair still perfect, his white coat somehow spotless despite the past 3 hours. And Evelyn, pushing her mop bucket toward the corner, became very still. Her eyes tracked the movements around her with a precision that would have alarmed anyone paying attention. But no one was paying attention to the cleaning woman. They were focused on the ambulance bay doors, on the approaching sirens, on the patient who was about to crash through those doors with minutes to live. Evelyn's hands, trembling moments ago, had gone completely still. The sirens grew louder, closer. The distinctive wail that meant emergency, meant hurry, meant someone's life was measured in seconds. The ambulance bay doors exploded open. 2 paramedics burst through, guiding a gurney at a near run. The patient was a young man, construction worker by the looks of his clothes, covered in blood and drywall dust. His face was gray. His breathing was rapid and shallow, each breath seeming to take enormous effort. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and tired hands, rattled off vitals as they moved. "Patient's name is Ryan Grant, 32 years old, unrestrained driver, single vehicle rollover on Route 42. Found 20 feet from the vehicle. Significant blunt force trauma to the left chest. We've got diminished breath sounds on the left side. Tracheal deviation noted. JVD present. Hypotensive despite 2 liters of crystalloid. Tachycardic and worsening." They transferred the patient to the hospital gurney with practiced efficiency. Sterling stepped forward, his hands already gloved, his expression set in that particular mask of concentrated authority. "Trauma Bay 1, he commanded. "I want a chest X-ray stat. Get me 2 large bore IVs type and cross for 4 units. Someone page radiology." They moved as a unit, the patient surrounded by a swarm of scrubs and stethoscopes. Evelyn stood in the corner, 30 feet away, her mop forgotten. And she saw what they didn't see, the patient's neck. The veins were distended, bulging like ropes beneath the skin. His trachea, the windpipe, was shifted noticeably to the right, and most telling of all, his left chest wasn't moving. The right side rose and fell with each desperate breath, but the left remained still, flat. Tension pneumothorax. The diagnosis formed in Evelyn's mind with absolute certainty. Air trapped in the chest cavity, building pressure, collapsing the lung, shifting the heart and major vessels. If not treated immediately, the patient would code. And once he coded, he would die. She took a step forward, then stopped. This wasn't her place. She was a nurse. No, not even that anymore. She was a cleaning woman, the lowest rung on the hospital's ladder. If she spoke up, if she challenged Dr. Sterling in front of his team, she would be dismissed, humiliated, fired. But the patient was dying. In Trauma Bay 1, Sterling was calling for the X-ray machine. The radiology tech was scrambling to position the equipment. Precious seconds ticking away. A minute, maybe 2 minutes before the X-ray would be ready. Another minute to process. Another minute to confirm what Evelyn could see right now, standing 30 feet away with nothing but her eyes and 22 years of combat experience. "Dr. Sterling?" Her voice was quiet. Almost too quiet. But something in its tone, some quality that she had tried so hard to suppress, cut through the noise of the trauma bay. Sterling looked up, his expression already annoyed. "What?" "The patient needs a needle decompression." The trauma bay went silent. Not completely silent. The monitors still beeped. The oxygen hissed. But the human noise, the voices, the rustling of movement, all of it stopped as every person in the room turned to look at the cleaning woman who had just offered an unsolicited medical diagnosis. Sterling's face flushed red. "Excuse me?" "Breath sounds absent on the left," Evelyn said, her voice still quiet but gaining strength. "Tracheal deviation to the right. Jugular vein distension. Hypotension despite fluids. Those are the signs of tension pneumothorax. He needs needle decompression. Now." Sterling took 3 steps toward her, each step deliberate, each step designed to intimidate. "Listen to me very carefully, Thorne." His voice was low, dangerous. "You are a janitor, a floor mopper. You are here to clean up vomit and empty trash. You are not here to offer medical opinions. You are not qualified to diagnose, and you will not undermine me in my trauma bay. Do you understand?" "The patient is dying," Evelyn said. "I said, do you understand?" "Yes, doctor." "Good. Now get out of my sight before I have security remove you." Evelyn took a step back, then another. She was retreating toward the corner when the monitor's tone changed. The steady beep became a whine. A single, high-pitched note that every medical professional knows. Flatline. "He's coding!" Nolan shouted, his hands already moving to the patient's chest, ready to start compressions. "Push epi," Sterling yelled. "Get the crash cart. Start compressions." Nolan began chest compressions. Hard, fast, desperate pumps trying to manually circulate blood through a body that had given up. But with each compression, nothing changed. The line stayed flat. "It won't work," Evelyn said. Not loud, just a simple statement of fact. "Compressions won't work on a tension pneumothorax. The heart can't fill because the air pressure is crushing it. You have to release the pressure." Sterling spun on her. "I told you to get out!" The flat line continued its scream. 20 seconds of CPR. 30 seconds. The patient's face was turning blue. Evelyn looked at the tray of instruments beside the bed, looked at the 14-gauge angiocath sitting there, sterile and unused, looked at the patient dying in front of her. She had 2 choices. Follow orders, stay in her lane, let the man die rather than risk her job, her fragile invisibility, her carefully constructed disguise of helplessness. Or do what she was trained to do. 22 years ago, in the dust and heat of Kandahar, she had taken an oath. Not the Hippocratic oath, that came later, but the oath that mattered more, never leave a fallen comrade. This man wasn't her comrade, wasn't a soldier, wasn't even someone she knew, But he was dying, and she could save him, and in the end, that was all that mattered. Evelyn moved, not slowly, not carefully. She moved with the speed and precision of someone who had performed this exact procedure under enemy fire, in the back of moving vehicles, on rooftops and in ditches, and once, memorably, in the flooded basement of a building that was actively being shelled. She crossed the 30 feet to the trauma bay in 4 strides. Her limp was gone. Her hunched shoulders were straight. Her trembling hands were rock-steady as she reached past a stunned Bethany Frost and grabbed the 14-gauge angiocath from the tray. "Get her out of here!" Sterling screamed. "Security! Security!" Evelyn didn't hear him. She was already counting ribs. Her left hand palpated the patient's chest. First rib, second rib. There, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. The sweet spot. She didn't hesitate. Didn't second-guess. Her right hand positioned the needle perpendicular to the chest wall. And then, with the smooth, practiced motion of someone who had done this hundreds of times, she drove it home. The resistance of skin, the pop of intercostal muscle, the distinctive give as the needle entered the pleural space. And then, the hiss. It was audible even over the monitor alarms. A sharp, angry hiss like a tire deflating. Trapped air rushing out of the chest cavity, releasing the pressure that had been crushing the heart and lungs. 3 seconds. That's all it took. The flat line jumped. A blip. Then another. Then a rhythm. Irregular at first, then steadying. The monitor began to beep again. Slow, then faster, finding its pattern. "Sinus tach," Nolan said, his voice filled with wonder. "BP is coming up, 90/60, 95/62. The patient gasped. Not a gentle breath. A violent, desperate gulp of air. His chest heaved. His eyes flew open, wild and terrified, then closed again as his body realized it could breathe. He was alive. Evelyn stepped back. Her hands, steady throughout the procedure, began to tremble again. Not from fear, from the adrenaline dump that always came after. The shaking that signaled her body returning from crisis mode to normal function. She looked down at the needle, still protruding from the patient's chest, and carefully withdrew it. She dropped it into the sharps container with a soft clink. Then she turned to face the room. Every person in the trauma bay was staring at her. Nolan's mouth was open. Bethany looked pale. The residents were frozen in place like statues. And Sterling. Sterling's face had gone from red to white to purple. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. His jaw worked, opening and closing, as if his brain couldn't quite process what it needed his mouth to say. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight, controlled. The kind of control that comes from rage so intense it has to be leashed. "You just assaulted a patient." "I saved his life," Evelyn said quietly. "You performed a surgical procedure without a medical license, without authorization, against my direct orders." Each word was bitten off, sharp. "You are finished, Thorne. Do you understand me?" "Finished." "Dr. Sterling," Nolan began. "She was right. The patient was—" "I don't care if she turned water into wine," Sterling snarled. "She is a nurse. She stays in her lane. This is my ER, my patient, my call." He turned to the security guard who had just arrived. "Escort Ms. Thorne to the director's office. She is to wait there for me. And someone call Director Reed. Tell her we have a situation." Sterling stepped closer to Evelyn, close enough that she could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "You should have stayed invisible," he said softly, "because now I'm going to make sure everyone sees exactly what you are. A liability. A danger. Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to her." Evelyn looked at him. Really looked at him. At the expensive watch, the designer glasses, the perfectly pressed white coat. The face of a man who had never once in his life been in a situation where his credentials, his family connections, his Ivy League education couldn't save him. She almost pitied him. "I understand, Doctor," she said. And she did. She understood that she had just destroyed the life she had spent 14 years building. The invisibility, the safety, the quiet anonymity of being no one special. She had saved a man's life, and it was going to cost her everything. The walk to the administrative offices was long. The security guard, an older man named Paul who had always been polite to her, walked 3 feet behind. Not beside, behind, as if she were a criminal being escorted to jail. Word had already spread. Evelyn could see it in the faces of the nurses they passed, the whispered conversations that stopped when she appeared, the eyes that followed her progress. By the time the day shift arrived, everyone would know. The cleaning woman who had attacked a patient, who had gone crazy, who had proven that she was exactly what Sterling had always said she was: unstable, dangerous, a liability. They reached the administrative wing. Paul opened the door to Director Victoria Reed's office. "Wait here," he said. Not unkindly. "Don't touch anything." The door closed. Evelyn was alone. The office was exactly what she expected. Expensive furniture, framed diplomas and awards covering the walls, a massive desk made of dark wood. Everything designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind visitors of the power differential between themselves and the woman who sat behind that desk. Evelyn didn't sit. She stood by the window looking out at the parking lot 3 stories below. The sky was starting to lighten. Dawn was coming. The graveyard shift was almost over, and so was her career at Mercy Valley Hospital. She should have felt fear, anxiety, panic, but all she felt was a strange, distant calm, like she was watching this happen to someone else, someone she used to know. The door opened. Director Victoria Reed swept in like a force of nature. She was 53, impeccably dressed even at 5:30 in the morning, with the kind of ruthless efficiency that had propelled her to the top of hospital administration. Behind her came Sterling, and behind him, Bethany Frost. Witnesses! Of course, Reed sat behind her desk, folding her hands on the surface. She didn't invite Evelyn to sit. The message was clear. This was not a conversation. This was a sentencing. "Ms. Thorne," Reed began, her voice crisp, "Dr. Sterling has informed me of a very serious incident that occurred approximately 30 minutes ago. An incident in which you, with no medical authorization whatsoever, performed an invasive procedure on a patient against the direct orders of the attending physician." "The patient was dying," Evelyn said. "That is not your determination to make. You are not a doctor. You are not even technically a nurse anymore." Reed glanced at a file on her desk. "Your nursing license lapsed 6 years ago. You never renewed it, which means you are, in the eyes of this hospital and the state of Ohio, simply an employee in housekeeping. I saved his life. You assaulted him." Reed's voice hardened. "What you did is not just a violation of hospital protocol. It is a criminal act. Dr. Sterling would be well within his rights to call the police and have you arrested for battery." Sterling, standing beside the desk, smiled. Not a nice smile, a victorious smile. "However," Reed continued, "we are not going to do that. Because frankly, Ms. Thorne, you are not worth the publicity. Instead, we are going to make this very simple. You are terminated, effective immediately. You will surrender your hospital ID badge, your access card, and any hospital property in your possession. You will leave the premises within the hour, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement stating that you will not discuss this incident or your employment here with anyone. In return, we will not press charges. We will not contest unemployment. We will simply part ways, quietly." Evelyn looked at Reed, then at Sterling, then at Bethany, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet her eyes. "Do I get to speak?" Evelyn asked. "Is there anything you could possibly say that would change this outcome?" "No," Evelyn admitted. "I suppose not." She reached into her pocket and pulled out her ID badge, placed it on the desk, then her access card. She had nothing else that belonged to the hospital. No locker, no personal effects stored in a break-room cubby. She had learned long ago to travel light, to be ready to leave at a moment's notice. "The NDA?" Reed prompted, sliding a paper across the desk. Evelyn looked at it. Standard legal boilerplate. She could sign it or not. It wouldn't matter. She had no intention of talking to anyone about this. She signed. "Good," Reed said, taking the paper back. "You're free to go." I suggest you use the side exit. Avoid the ER. I don't want you causing any more disruption." Evelyn nodded. She turned toward the door. "Miss Thorne!" Sterling called out. She paused but didn't turn around. "You should have stayed in your lane," he said. "Maybe then you'd still have a job." Evelyn stood there for a moment. She could have said 100 things, could have told him exactly what she thought of him, of his incompetence disguised as confidence, of his willingness to let a patient die rather than admit he was wrong. But she didn't, because in the end it wouldn't change anything. Men like Sterling never learned, never grew, never admitted fault. So instead she simply said, "Have a good morning, doctor," and she walked out. The side exit led to a small parking lot reserved for staff. The sky was fully light now, the sun just beginning to peek over the hospital's eastern wing. The November air was cold, crisp, carrying the smell of frost and dead leaves. Evelyn's car was parked in the far corner, a 12-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door and a tape deck that only played side A. It wasn't much, but it was paid for, and it ran. She got in, started the engine, turned on the heat, and then, for the first time in 14 years, Evelyn Thorne allowed herself to cry. Not loud, wrenching sobs, just quiet tears that slipped down her cheeks and dripped onto her scrubs. Tears for the job she had lost, for the invisibility that had been stripped away, for the careful, fragile life she had built that had just collapsed in the span of 30 minutes. But also, underneath the grief, something else. Relief. Because she had done it. When it mattered most, when the choice was between following orders and doing what was right, she had chosen right. She had saved a man's life, and no matter what happened next, no matter what consequences came, that life was saved. Ryan Grant, 32 years old, construction worker, would go home to his family, would see another sunrise, would live, because of her. The tears slowed, stopped. Evelyn wiped her face with the sleeve of her scrubs. She put the car in reverse, backed out of her parking space for the last time. As she drove past the ER entrance, she saw Sterling through the glass doors. He was talking to a group of residents, gesturing animatedly, probably telling them the story, making himself the hero, warning them about nurses who didn't know their place. Evelyn drove past without slowing. She had 12 miles to drive. 12 miles to her small apartment. 12 miles to figure out what came next. How to pay rent. How to buy groceries. How to survive as a 58-year-old woman with a lapsed nursing license and a termination on her record. The radio in the car was broken, so she drove in silence. Just the hum of the engine, the whisper of tires on asphalt, the rhythmic thump of the damaged tire that she couldn't afford to replace. She didn't think about the fact that somewhere decisions were being made, phone calls were being placed, assets were being mobilized. She didn't know that her life was about to change again. She was thinking about Sergeant Marcus Cole, about the day he died, about how his blood had looked impossibly red against the tan sand, about the promise she had made to herself that day, kneeling in the dirt with her hands covered in his blood. Never again. Never again would she stand by and watch someone die when she had the power to save them. She had broken that promise over the past 14 years, broken it 100 times, 1,000 times. Every time she had stayed silent, stayed invisible, stayed in her lane. But not today. Today she had remembered who she was, and there was no going back. The apartment was exactly as she had left it 6 hours earlier. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her hand still on the knob, and felt the weight of those 6 hours settle onto her shoulders like a physical thing. The overnight bag sat beside the door where she had dropped it. The coffee cup from yesterday morning, still half full, sat on the kitchen counter. The newspapers she had been meaning to recycle were stacked neatly by the door. Everything was the same. Everything was different. She closed the door behind her with a soft click. The apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom. A kitchen that was really just a corner of the living room with a stove and a refrigerator that hummed too loudly. But it was hers, paid for with money, She had earned mopping floors and cleaning bedpans and staying invisible. The clock on the microwave read 6:47 a.m. Most people would be waking up now, getting ready for work, making coffee, checking their phones, starting their day with the comfortable routine of people who knew where they belonged in the world. Evelyn had no idea where she belonged anymore. She moved through the apartment on autopilot, hung her keys on the hook by the door, set her bag on the small table, took off her jacket and folded it over the back of the chair. Each movement precise, controlled. The muscle memory of someone who had spent decades in environments where disorder meant death. Only when she reached the bedroom did she pause. On the wall above her dresser, in a simple black frame, was a photograph. 6 people in desert fatigue stood in front of a battered Humvee. The paint was scorched, the windshield was cracked. Behind them, mountains rose against an impossibly blue sky. Afghanistan, Kandahar Province, Forward Operating Base Wolverine. The photo was from 22 years ago, but Evelyn could name every person in it without looking. Lieutenant Jackson Hayes, team leader, dead now, killed by an IED in Fallujah 3 years after this photo was taken. Corpsman, First Class Maria Rodriguez, combat medic. Married now, living in San Diego with 2 kids and a practice specializing in pediatric emergency medicine. Sergeant David Coleman, heavy weapons. Retired after 20 years working security for an oil company in Texas. Chief Petty Officer Dominic Kane, explosives expert. Still active duty. Last Evelyn heard, he had made commander and was running training operations. And in the middle, with her arm around a young man's shoulders, was Evelyn herself. 36 years old, hair pulled back in a severe bun, eyes sharp and clear. The person she used to be before Marcus Cole died. Because the young man whose shoulders she was holding was Sergeant Marcus Everett Cole, 23 years old, bright eyes, easy smile, the kind of kid who made everyone around him better just by being there. He played guitar, badly. He quoted poetry, obscure stuff that no one else had heard of. He wrote letters to his girlfriend back home every single day without fail. 2 months after this photo was taken, Marcus Cole bled out in Evelyn's arms. She had tried everything, applied pressure, called for medevac, started 2 IVs with shaking hands while bullets cracked overhead. But the wound was too severe. A piece of shrapnel from a rocket-propelled grenade had torn through his femoral artery, and no amount of skill or training or desperate prayer could stop the bleeding. It took him 11 minutes to die. Evelyn had counted every second. She sat down on the edge of the bed, still wearing her scrubs stained with coffee and antiseptic and the sweat of fear. The photograph stared at her, Marcus's smile, her own serious expression, the easy camaraderie of people who trusted each other absolutely. The exhaustion hit her like a physical wave. She had been awake for 22 hours. The adrenaline that had carried her through the shift, through the confrontation, through the firing, was gone. In its place was a bone-deep weariness that made her limbs feel like lead. She lay back on the bed, just for a moment, just to rest her eyes. She was asleep in 30 seconds. The dreams came immediately. They always did when she was this tired. Not the controlled, manageable flashbacks she had learned to live with, but the full, immersive nightmares that dragged her back to the dust and heat and blood, the valley, the ambush, Marcus screaming, the spray of arterial blood that painted her hands red, his voice, fading. "I'm tired, Phantom. I'm so tired." "Stay with me," she heard herself say. But the words were wrong. The timing was wrong. In the dream, she was saying them too late. He was already gone. His eyes already empty. She woke with a gasp. The clock read 7:32 a.m. She had been asleep for 45 minutes. The apartment was silent except for the refrigerator's hum and the distant sound of traffic outside. Evelyn sat up slowly. Her head felt thick. Her mouth tasted like copper and regret. She needed water, coffee, something to ground herself back in the present. She was standing, heading toward the kitchen, when her phone rang. The sound was jarring in the quiet apartment. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. Local area code. Evelyn's finger hovered over the decline button. It was probably a telemarketer. or a recruiter calling about the termination that was already spreading through the hospital grapevine, or a bill collector. Something made her answer. "Hello?" Silence. Then a man's voice, deep, controlled. The voice of someone used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "Is this Evelyn Thorne?" "Who's asking?" "My name is Commander Dominic Kane, United States Navy. I need to speak with you about an urgent matter." Evelyn's heart, which had been slowly settling into normal rhythm, kicked back up. The name was familiar. Kane. Dominic Kane. She knew that name. "Dom?" she said slowly. "Dom Kane from Wolverine?" "Yes, ma'am. I wasn't sure you'd remember me. It's been a long time." "You made commander. Congratulations." "Thank you. But I'm not calling to catch up, Evelyn. I'm calling because I need your help. A man's life depends on it." Evelyn closed her eyes. "I just lost my job for helping someone. I'm not in a position to—" "I know what happened at Mercy Valley. I know you were terminated 90 minutes ago, and I'm calling because of what happened. Because you saved that man's life. Because you're still the best combat medic I've ever seen. Dom, I'm retired. 14 years. I'm aware. I'm also aware that you just performed a needle decompression in a civilian ER under hostile conditions and saved a patient who would have died otherwise. That's not the action of someone who's retired. That's the action of someone who's a medic down to their DNA." Evelyn opened her eyes, looked at the photograph on her wall. "What do you need?" "Lieutenant Caleb Mitchell, 22 years old, helicopter pilot, son of Senator Richard Mitchell. He was injured in a training exercise near the Kentucky border 2 hours ago. Fragment from a damaged rotor blade penetrated his right inguinal region. It's lodged against the iliac artery. Our flight surgeon is afraid to extract it. He says you're the only person who's ever successfully performed this particular procedure under field conditions." Evelyn's breath caught. "The Thorne Protocol." "Yes, ma'am. That was 20 years ago. You published it, taught it. But knowing how to do something and having the hands to do it under pressure are two different things. And right now, ma'am, we need your hands." "Why are you calling me? Why not land at the nearest trauma center and get a surgeon?" "Because the nearest trauma center is Mercy Valley Hospital. And because Lieutenant Mitchell asked for you by name. He knows the legend. Every SEAL knows about Phantom. About the medic who wrote the textbook on junctional hemorrhage. About the woman who performed 17 arterial repairs under fire and never lost a patient. 17, the number hung in the air. Evelyn had tried to forget that number, tried to forget all of it, but your body remembers what your mind tries to bury. "Where are you?" she asked. "We're inbound to Mercy Valley, ETA 7 minutes. We've been tracking the situation since it happened. We had assets monitoring your termination. We know you're home. We're coming to you." "You've been watching me?" "Yes, ma'am." "That's concerning, Commander." "Yes, ma'am, but also necessary. We need an answer, Senior Chief. Will you help us?" Evelyn looked around her apartment, at the life she had built. Small, safe, invisible. A life that had just ended in a director's office while a man who had never saved a life in his life smiled and told her she should have stayed in her lane. Then she looked at the photograph again, at Marcus Cole's smile, at the 6 people who had trusted each other with their lives. 47 saves during her military career. 47 people who went home because she was there when they needed her. She had tried to make it 48 22 years ago, had failed, had carried that failure every day since. "Give me 2 minutes to change," she said. "Roger that. We'll be landing in 6. The line went dead. Evelyn stood frozen for 3 seconds. Then she moved. Not the slow, careful movements of the invisible janitor. The fast, efficient movements of a combat medic responding to a call. She stripped off her scrubs, pulled on cargo pants and a dark t-shirt, laced up her hiking boots, pulled her hair back into a tight, secure ponytail, grabbed a jacket. On her way out, she paused at the photograph one more time. "This one's for you, Marcus," she whispered. Then she was out the door and running down the stairs. At Mercy Valley Hospital, The day shift was settling into its rhythm. The night shift had given report and gone home. Fresh nurses were organizing their assignments. Doctors were making rounds. The chaos of the overnight had given way to the controlled bustle of regular hours. Bethany Frost was at the nurses' station trying to focus on paperwork, but she couldn't stop thinking about Evelyn Thorne, about the way those hands had moved when they grabbed that needle. Fast. Sure. No hesitation, like they had done it 1,000 times before, which apparently they had. Bethany had gone home after the firing, had tried to sleep, couldn't, had gotten up and done what she always did when she couldn't sleep, Googled things. She had typed Evelyn Thorne Navy Medic into the search bar. What came up had made her feel sick. Articles, commendations, a grainy photograph from 20 years ago showing a younger Evelyn receiving the Silver Star from a 3-star admiral. The citation was partially redacted, but the visible parts were enough. Despite being under direct enemy fire, performed life-saving surgery on 3 critically wounded operators, remained calm under sustained automatic weapons fire, refused evacuation until all casualties were stabilized. Bethany had fired up the hospital's old employee files. Evelyn's resume from when she was first hired was bare bones. United States Navy, 22 years. Honorable discharge, multiple commendations. That was it. No details, no elaboration, just a woman trying to disappear into a low-level job and be left alone. And they had tormented her. Bethany felt the shame like a physical weight. "You okay?" Nolan appeared beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't. Nolan, did you know? About Thorne? About who she really was?" "No, but I knew she wasn't just a janitor. You could tell by the way she moved, the way she observed. She saw everything. We were horrible to her." "Yeah, we were." Bethany was about to say more when she felt it. A vibration, not loud, not obvious, just a subtle tremor that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The coffee in her cup rippled, the pens on the counter rattled softly against each other. "What is that?" Nolan asked. The vibration grew stronger. Now it was audible, a low, rhythmic thrumming, like distant thunder, but the sky outside was clear. Bethany stood. Other nurses were standing too, looking around, confused. Mr. Harrison, still in room 312 recovering from pneumonia, was at his door. His old eyes were sharp, alert. "I know that sound," he said quietly. The thrumming grew louder, deeper, the kind of sound you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. The fluorescent lights overhead began to shake. Dust drifted down from the ceiling tiles. Someone's phone on the counter started to vibrate, then another, then another. Outside, through the windows, car alarms began to wail. The thrumming became a beating, regular, rhythmic, thump, 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 thump. Getting louder, getting closer. Bethany moved to the window. Other staff members followed. They pressed against the glass, staring out at the parking lot. The sound was deafening now, overwhelming. The entire building seemed to shake with each beat. And then it appeared, rising above the tree line on the east side of the hospital, black against the bright morning sky, massive, angular, military, a Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter, matte black, no markings, no identification numbers, no medical cross, just raw, purposeful machinery designed for one thing, the rapid insertion of personnel into hostile territory. It wasn't heading for the helipad on the roof. It was coming straight down, toward the grass lawn between the ER entrance and the visitor parking lot. "Oh my God," someone whispered. The helicopter descended with the precision of a controlled missile strike. The rotor wash flattened the manicured grass, sent leaves and debris swirling in violent eddies. The Bradford pear trees that lined the walkway bent nearly horizontal. Dr. Sterling's prized rose garden, the one he had personally funded and maintained, the one with the little brass plaque that read, "In memory of Dr. James Sterling, 1942 to 2019, exploded into a chaos of petals and torn stems and flying mulch. The Black Hawk's wheels touched grass. The sound was apocalyptic. And then, before the rotors had even begun to slow, the side door opened. 4 men jumped out. Not climbed, not stepped carefully, jumped, hit the ground and immediately spread into a tactical formation with the practiced efficiency of people who had done this 1,000 times. They wore multicam combat pants, tactical vests loaded with magazines, drop-leg holsters with sidearms, ballistic sunglasses despite the bright morning, and each carried an AR-15 rifle held at the low-ready position, fingers indexed along the receiver. Not threatening, not yet. But ready to become threatening in a fraction of a second. These were not paramedics. These were warriors. The lead man was massive, 6'4" at least, 260 pounds of pure muscle, built like a linebacker who could bench press a compact car. His shoulders barely fit through the helicopter door. His name tape read, Coleman, call sign, Brick. His rank insignia marked him as a chief petty officer. The nickname fit. He moved like a walking concrete wall. Behind him, 3 more operators. Leaner, faster, but no less dangerous. They moved toward the ER entrance with the ground-eating stride of people who owned every space they entered. Inside, at the nurse's station, Bethany's coffee cup slipped from her numb fingers and shattered on the floor. "What is happening?" Nolan breathed. The automatic doors opened. Chief Petty Officer Wade "Brick" Coleman stepped through. His eyes scanned the room with mechanical precision. Threat assessment, exit routes, personnel count, all processed in 2 seconds. Paul, the security guard, moved to intercept. His hand went to the pepper spray on his belt, a pathetic gesture against men who had trained to resist chemical weapons as a matter of routine. "Excuse me," Paul said, his voice cracking slightly. "You can't bring weapons in here. This is a hospital. This is a gun-free zone." Coleman looked at him. Not unkindly, just looked. The way a tiger might look at a house cat that had wandered into its territory. Coleman's hand, the size of a dinner plate, placed itself gently but firmly on Paul's chest and moved him aside, not roughly, not violently, just moved him, as if he were a piece of furniture that needed rearranging. Coleman touched his radio. "Alpha Actual, lobby secure. No hostile contacts. Proceeding to objective." He walked to the reception desk. The young woman there, Sarah, stared up at him with eyes as wide as saucers. "I need the location of Senior Chief Evelyn Thorne," Coleman said. His voice was deep, controlled, the kind of voice that expected immediate compliance. "Call sign Phantom. She's a nurse here. Where is she?" Sarah's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I don't... Who?" "Evelyn Thorne, 5'5", brown hair, probably hiding in the background where people like you don't notice her. Where is she?" "I don't... What the hell is going on here?" Dr. Garrett Sterling burst through the double doors from the physician's lounge. His face was red. His perfectly styled hair was, for once, slightly disheveled. He looked at the soldiers, at their weapons, at the helicopter visible through the windows, and he exploded. "You landed a helicopter on my rose garden!" Sterling marched toward Coleman, puffing his chest, trying to use height and authority. It was like watching a poodle challenge a grizzly bear. "I am Dr. Garrett Sterling, chief attending of this emergency department. I am the ranking medical officer in this facility, and I am ordering you to leave, immediately, before I call the police and have you arrested for trespassing and—" "Are you the OIC?" Coleman asked. "I'm Dr. Garrett Sterling and I don't care about your—" "I asked if you are the officer in charge." Coleman took a step forward. Sterling instinctively took a step back. "We have a critical extraction incoming. Time-sensitive medical emergency. I need your best trauma assets. And I need Evelyn Thorne. Now." Sterling blinked. His brain, which had been running on outrage and indignation, suddenly processed the name, and he laughed. It was a high, incredulous sound. Disbelief mixing with contempt. "Thorne?" Sterling said. "You landed a military assault helicopter to find Thorne, the nurse I fired 90 minutes ago for incompetence?" He laughed again. "Gentlemen, I don't know who sent you or what kind of mistake has been made, but Evelyn Thorne is a liability. She's unstable. She shakes when she pours coffee. She just attacked a patient with what I can only describe as a psychotic break. She is the last person you want treating anyone." The double doors opened again. A man stepped through. He was smaller than Coleman, 5'11" maybe, but he commanded the space in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. He was 44 years old, close-cropped dark hair going gray at the temples, a face mapped with scars, 3 days of stubble, eyes the color of winter ice. On his chest, pinned to his tactical vest, was a gold trident. Navy SEAL. Commander Dominic Kane looked at Sterling the way an entomologist might look at an interesting but ultimately insignificant insect. "You fired her," Kane said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes, for assaulting a patient, for gross insubordination, for—" "Let me make sure I understand," Kane interrupted. His voice was quiet, reasonable, which somehow made it more terrifying. "You fired the woman we flew 300 miles to find. The woman who is, at this moment, the only person on the eastern seaboard qualified to perform a procedure that will save the life of a United States Senator's son. You fired her." Sterling's laugh died in his throat. "Senators, I don't understand." Kane took 3 steps forward, each step deliberate, each step closing the distance until he was inside Sterling's personal space, close enough that Sterling had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact. "The woman you call a liability," Kane said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "is Senior Chief Evelyn Thorne, 22 years naval service, 3 combat deployments with DevGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group. You might know it better as SEAL Team 6. He paused. Let that sink in. "She has 47 combat saves, 47 men who went home to their families because she was there when they needed her. She wrote the protocol for far-forward arterial repair. The procedure is named after her, the Thorne Protocol. It's taught at every military medical facility in the country." Sterling's face had gone from red to white. "She is," Kane continued, "the most decorated female combat medic in naval special warfare history. She has the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with V for Valor, the Purple Heart, twice. And you fired her because she saved a patient's life that you were about to let die through your own incompetence." I wasn't, she didn't tell me." "Where is she?" It wasn't a question. It was a command delivered with the full weight of military authority. She left. After we terminated her. I don't know where she went. She drove home, I think." Kane stared at Sterling for 3 long seconds. Then he turned to Coleman. "Brick, get me her address." "Already have it, boss." Coleman was on his radio. "Asset confirms she's home. 3 clicks northeast, apartment building on Elm Street." "Good. I'm going to bring her in." Kane turned back to Sterling one last time. "You should pray that Senior Chief Thorne agrees to help us, because if Lieutenant Mitchell dies because she wasn't here, because you fired her for doing her job, then Senator Mitchell will know exactly who to blame, and senators have long memories." Kane walked toward the door. Coleman and the other operators fell in around him. At the threshold, Kane paused, looked back. "Oh, and doctor? You might want to start thinking about updating your resume." Then they were gone. Back to the helicopter. The rotors increased their tempo. The Black Hawk lifted off with brutal efficiency. In 30 seconds it was moving low and fast toward the northeast, and Sterling stood in the middle of the ER, surrounded by staff members who were all very carefully not looking at him, and realized that his world had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to understand. 3 minutes later, the Black Hawk touched down in an empty lot 3 blocks from Evelyn's apartment building. Kane and Coleman jumped out and jogged toward the address. They found her waiting on the sidewalk. She had changed clothes, cargo pants, dark t-shirt, hiking boots, hair pulled back tight. She looked small, ordinary, just another middle-aged woman on a Wednesday morning. But Kane saw past the disguise, saw the way she stood, the way her eyes tracked their approach, the readiness in her posture. "Senior Chief Thorne," Kane said. "Thanks for saying yes." Don't thank me yet, Commander. I haven't seen the patient. Fair enough. Let's move. They ran back to the helicopter. Evelyn grabbed the frame and pulled herself up without assistance. Muscle memory. She had done this 1,000 times before. The crew chief didn't offer to help. He could tell she didn't need it. Kane climbed in after her. Coleman was already inside. The pilot increased power immediately. They were airborne in seconds. "Lieutenant Mitchell is in the other bird," Kane said, pointing through the window at a second helicopter flying parallel to them. A Pavehawk configured for medical evacuation. "He's been stable, but he's declining. Infection markers are spiking. We need to extract that fragment and clean the wound before sepsis kills him." "How long has he been injured?" 3 hours, give or take. Evelyn nodded. 3 hours was borderline. Enough time for bacteria to establish themselves. Not enough time for catastrophic infection if they acted fast. "Tell me about the fragment," she said. Kane pulled out a tablet, called up an image. It was a field X-ray, grainy but clear enough. Evelyn leaned in. There. A jagged piece of metal lodged deep in the right inguinal region. She could see the barbed edges. Could see how close it was to the major vessels. One wrong move during extraction, and the patient would bleed out in seconds. "Who's your flight surgeon?" "Lieutenant Ramos. Good man. Smart. But he's scared." "He should be. This is a career-ending injury if we screw it up. That's why I called you." Evelyn looked at Kane. Really looked at him. Saw the years and the scars and the weight of command. They had served together 22 years ago. 2 tours in Afghanistan. He had been an operator. She had been his medic. They had trusted each other with their lives. "Why didn't you call me before this?" she asked quietly. 14 years, Dom. You knew where I was?" "I did, and I respected your choice to step away. You'd earned that. But today I didn't have a choice. This kid needs you. And honestly, Evelyn, I think you need this too." She didn't answer, because he was right. She had spent 14 years trying to be someone she wasn't. Trying to forget. Trying to be normal. But she wasn't normal. She never had been. She was a combat medic. It was what she did. Who she was. The helicopter banked hard. Mercy Valley Hospital appeared below them. The rose garden was a disaster. The grass showed the marks of their earlier landing. They were going back. But this time, Evelyn Thorne wasn't arriving as a fired janitor. She was arriving as exactly what she had always been. A warrior medic. One of the best who had ever lived. And Mercy Valley Hospital was about to learn what that really meant. The Black Hawk flared hard and landed. The Pavehawk was already on the ground, ramped down, medical personnel moving inside. Evelyn was out and moving before the wheels fully settled. She ran toward the Pavehawk, climbed inside. Lieutenant Caleb Mitchell was on the litter. 22 years old, pale, sweating. His breathing was fast and shallow, signs of early septic shock. But his eyes were open, alert, tracking her. "Lieutenant," Evelyn said, "I'm Senior Chief Thorne. I understand you asked for me." "Phantom," Caleb whispered. His voice was weak but clear. They said you were here. Said you could do this." "I can. But I need you to trust me. This is going to hurt, a lot. And you have to stay absolutely still. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn looked at the wound. Someone had packed it with hemostatic gauze and applied a pressure dressing. Good work. But the fragment was still in there, and every minute it stayed was another minute closer to systemic collapse. She turned to find the flight surgeon, a young lieutenant with scared eyes but steady hands. "Lieutenant Ramos?" "Yes, ma'am." "Senior Chief, I've read your work. I've studied the Thorne Protocol. But I've never done this live. I don't trust myself not to kill him." "Then trust me. We're going to do this together. But we need a proper surgical suite. Let's move him inside." They transferred the litter to a gurney. 6 people. Fast. Efficient. They wheeled him toward the ER entrance. The staff parted. All eyes on Evelyn. Bethany Frost was there. Her face was white, ashamed. "Senior Chief," she whispered, I'm sorry for everything. I was wrong." Evelyn looked at her. There were 100 things she could say, but there was no time. "Get Trauma 1 prepped," Evelyn said. "Full sterile protocol. Move." Bethany ran. They pushed the gurney through the ER. Sterling was standing at the nurse's station, frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. Evelyn walked past him without a glance. "Trauma 1, she said. "Nolan, I need you on vitals. Michael, you're assisting. Where's Dr. Sterling?" There was a pause. Then Sterling's voice, small. "I'm here." Evelyn stopped, turned, looked at him. He wasn't the arrogant man who had fired her 2 hours ago. He looked diminished, scared. The encounter with Kane had stripped away the veneer to reveal what lay beneath. "I need you to place a Reboa catheter," Evelyn said, "through the left femoral artery. Can you do that?" Sterling swallowed. Yes, I think so." "Yes or no, doctor? I need to know." "Yes," Sterling said, firmer now. "Yes, I can do it." "Good. Scrub in. We're operating in 5 minutes." And just like that, Evelyn Thorne was back. Not the invisible janitor, not the fired employee, but the combat medic who had saved 47 lives and was about to save number 48. The warrior who had never really left. She was home. Trauma 1 had been transformed. The housekeeping staff had cleared it. Bethany and 2 other nurses had set up the sterile field with shaking hands and fierce determination. The vascular tray gleamed under the overhead lights like instruments of salvation. The ultrasound hummed, powered on and ready. Everything Evelyn had requested was there. Perfect. Waiting. They transferred Caleb Mitchell to the surgical table with the kind of choreographed efficiency that only comes from training and adrenaline working in perfect harmony. He was declining visibly now. Evelyn could see it in the numbers scrolling across the monitors. Blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing, temperature still rising, the infection was spreading. They had maybe 30 minutes before sepsis overwhelmed his system completely. Maybe less. "Okay," Evelyn said, standing at the scrub sink. Her hands moved automatically through the ritual cleansing that had preceded 1,000 procedures. Soap, water, brush, the muscle memory so deep it required no conscious thought. "Here's the situation. The fragment is barbed, multiple hooks. It's acting as a partial plug for the iliac artery. When we remove it, we're going to have significant hemorrhage, catastrophic if we're not ready for it." She scrubbed between each finger, under each nail, the same way she had in field hospitals and the backs of helicopters, and once, memorably, using bottled water and hand sanitizer in a bombed-out building with the ceiling collapsing around her. "Dr. Sterling is going to place a Reboa catheter through the contralateral femoral artery. Once it's in position, we'll inflate the balloon in zone 3 of the aorta. That stops blood flow below the diaphragm and gives us a dry field. But it also puts a timer on us. We'll have 3 minutes, maybe less. 3 minutes to extract the fragment and repair the artery before his legs die from ischemia." She rinsed. The water ran clear. Her hands were clean, ready. "Questions?" Nolan raised a hand. His voice was uncertain. 3 minutes to repair an artery? Senior Chief, that's not possible." "It's difficult," Evelyn corrected, looking at him directly. "Not impossible. I've done it 17 times. All successful. Today will be 18. She turned to look at Caleb. "You still with us, Lieutenant?" "Yes, ma'am." His voice was weak but determined. "Ready when you are." "That's what I like to hear." Evelyn finished scrubbing, dried her hands with sterile towels, held them up as a nurse gowned and gloved her. The gloves snapped into place with that distinctive sound. Final. Irrevocable. The sound that said there was no turning back now. She approached the table, looked down at the wound. The pressure dressing was soaked through with blood and serum. The surrounding skin was inflamed, hot to the touch. Infection was setting in fast. "Okay, Dr. Sterling," Evelyn said, her voice steady and clear. "Show me what you've got." Sterling approached from the opposite side of the table. He was nervous, She could see it in the way his hands trembled slightly as he pulled on his gloves. But he was there. He was trying. That counted for something. He palpated Caleb's left thigh, felt for the femoral pulse, found it, marked the spot with a sterile pen. "Local anesthetic," he said. His voice was steadier than his hands. He infiltrated the site with lidocaine, made a small incision, used the Seldinger technique to insert a guide wire, then threaded the catheter over it. His movements were careful, methodical, watching on the portable fluoroscopy as the catheter tip traveled up through the femoral artery, into the external iliac, up into the abdominal aorta. "Zone 3, Evelyn said, watching the screen. "Right there. Perfect. Lock it down." Sterling secured the catheter, attached the inflation device. He looked up, met her eyes. "Ready." "Nolan, start the timer when I say go. 3 minutes. Call out every 30 seconds, loud and clear." "Roger that." Evelyn positioned herself over the wound. Her hands hovered over the instrument tray, everything within easy reach. Scalpel, forceps, retractors, suture, the tools of her trade. She had used these instruments in conditions that would make a civilian surgeon weep. A well-lit trauma bay with actual electricity and running water was luxury. "Lieutenant Mitchell," she said, looking down at Caleb's face, "last chance to back out. This is going to hurt more than anything you've ever felt." "Do it," Caleb said. No hesitation. Operator's mindset. Mission first. "Dr. Sterling, inflate the balloon." Sterling pushed the plunger. The balloon expanded inside the aorta, occluding it completely. Blood flow to everything below the inflation point stopped. Caleb's femoral pulses, strong a moment ago, disappeared. His legs would be screaming for oxygen. The clock was running. "Timer," Evelyn said. "Go!" Nolan hit the stopwatch on the wall. The digital numbers began counting down from 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Mark. Evelyn's hands became a blur of controlled violence. She removed the pressure dressing in one smooth motion. The wound opened beneath her fingers. Blood welled up, but without arterial pressure behind it, the bleeding was slow, manageable. She could work. She could see the fragment now. Ugly. Irregular. About 4 inches long. It had penetrated at an angle, going deep into the inguinal canal. The barbs were embedded in muscle tissue, and worst of all, she could see one of the hooks was caught directly on the anterior wall of the external iliac artery. This was it. The moment. The reason Lieutenant Ramos had refused to touch it. Because extracting this fragment required perfect technique, perfect understanding of anatomy, perfect feel. One wrong move and the barb would tear the artery wide open. Caleb would hemorrhage faster than they could replace the blood. He would be dead before they could reinflate the balloon. 2:30 remaining, Nolan called out. Evelyn positioned the forceps, grasped the fragment firmly, but she didn't pull, not yet. First, she needed to see exactly how the barb was positioned. She used a retractor to open the wound wider. There. The fragment had entered from the lateral side. The barb was hooked on the anterior arterial wall like a fishhook in flesh. If she pulled straight out, it would tear through the vessel. Simple physics. Disaster. But if she rotated the fragment counterclockwise while applying gentle traction, the barb would disengage from the wall before the pulling force became destructive. 2 minutes, Nolan said. His voice was tight with tension. Evelyn rotated. Slowly, feeling the resistance through her fingertips. The fragment turned in her grip. The barb shifted. She could feel it moving against the arterial wall, disengaging, millimeter by millimeter, rotate, pull, rotate, pull, reading the feedback, knowing exactly when to push and when to ease off. The barb came free from the artery. Suddenly the fragment was moving freely. Evelyn pulled steadily, evenly, and the piece of metal slid out of the wound in one smooth motion. She dropped it into a basin with a metallic clink that echoed in the silent room. "Fragment out," she announced. Assessing damage. She used gauze to clear blood from the field. There it was, the artery, torn, a 2-centimeter laceration running longitudinally along the anterior wall, jagged edges. the kind of tear that was hard to repair even in ideal conditions. But it wasn't completely transected. That was good. That was workable. 90 seconds, Nolan called. Doc, his legs are getting mottled. I see it. Suture. 6-0-proline. The nurse slapped the needle driver into Evelyn's palm with perfect timing. She threaded the cardiovascular needle through the first bite of torn vessel. Then the second. She was sewing. Fast, precise, loop, throw, cut, loop, throw, cut. Her hands were machines, operating on muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought would only slow her down. This was what she had trained for. This was what 22 years of combat medicine had prepared her for. Not the easy cases, the hard ones, the ones where seconds mattered and perfection was the only acceptable outcome. 1 minute. She was halfway done. The repair was coming together. Each stitch pulled the torn edges closer together, approximating the intima, the critical inner layer that had to be perfect, or the vessel would clot off and Caleb would lose his leg despite their best efforts. 45 seconds. Doc, his legs are really mottled now. I see them. Evelyn didn't slow down, couldn't slow down. Loop, throw, cut. 3 more stitches. 4, 5. The rhythm was hypnotic. Perfect. She had done this 17 times before. Today would be 18. 30 seconds. Almost there. The laceration was nearly closed. Just 2 more stitches, maybe 3. 20 seconds. Legs are bad. 2 stitches. Definitely 2. The last stitch went in. Evelyn threw the final knot, pulled it tight, cut the suture. Done. 10 seconds. She dropped the instruments. Deflate! Now! Sterling released the balloon. The saline flowed back out. Blood rushed into Caleb's pelvis and legs like water through a broken dam. Everyone held their breath. If the repair leaked, they would know immediately. Arterial blood would spray. They'd have to reinflate and try again. And Caleb's legs, already oxygen-starved for 3 minutes, wouldn't survive a second round. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. The repair held. Not a drop leaked. The artery pulsed beneath Evelyn's fingers. Strong, regular, carrying life back to tissues that had been moments from death. Pulse check, Evelyn said, stepping back from the table. Nolan's hands flew to Caleb's feet. Right foot, left foot, feeling for dorsalis pedis pulses. His face transformed, broke into a grin so wide it looked painful. Strong pulses, both feet. He's pinking up. Look at his toes. The trauma bay erupted, not into chaos, into pure, unfiltered joy. Nolan was laughing. The nurses were hugging each other. Lieutenant Ramos was staring at the surgical site like he was witnessing a miracle. Even Sterling, exhausted and drained and looking 10 years older than he had an hour ago, was smiling. And Commander Kane, who had been watching from the doorway the entire time with his arms crossed and his face unreadable, gave a single, approving nod. Evelyn stripped off her gloves. Let them fall into the trash. Her hands were steady. No tremor, no shaking. Just the calm that came after a job well done, after dancing on the knife edge between life and death and coming out on the right side. She moved to Caleb's head. His eyes were open. Tears streaming down his face. Not from pain, though that was certainly there. From relief. From the overwhelming realization that he was going to live, that he wasn't going to bleed out in a hospital in Ohio, that he was going to see his family again, fly again, live. You did good, Lieutenant, Evelyn said quietly. She put a hand on his shoulder, gentle, reassuring. Stay still for a few more hours. Let that artery heal. Then you'll be back in the cockpit before you know it. Thank you, Caleb whispered. His voice was raw. Thank you, Phantom. They told me if anyone could save me, it was you. They were right. Just doing my job. Kane approached, extended his hand. Evelyn shook it. His grip was firm, warm, the handshake of comrades who had been through hell together and come out the other side. 17 for 17, you said. Make that 18 for 18. I don't keep score, Commander. Maybe you should. It's an impressive number. Kane glanced at Sterling, who was stripping off his gloves and looking like he might throw up. We'll be transferring Lieutenant Mitchell to Bethesda within the hour. Finish his recovery there. But before we go, there's something you should know. Director Reed received a call about 10 minutes ago from the Ohio State Board of Nursing. There's going to be a hearing. Evelyn felt her stomach drop. The victory of the surgery evaporated. A hearing. About your actions this morning. The needle decompression on Mr. Grant. They're investigating possible violations of scope of practice. Criminal charges for practicing medicine without a license. Kane's expression was grim, angry. Sterling filed a formal complaint. The state took it seriously. Evelyn looked at Sterling. He was staring at the floor, couldn't meet her eyes. When? She asked. 48 hours. Columbus, full disciplinary panel. I see. We're working on it, Kane said. But you should know, this isn't over, not by a long shot. 48 hours later, Evelyn sat in a conference room in the Ohio State Capitol building in Columbus. The room had been designed with one purpose: intimidation. Long table made of dark wood that probably cost more than Evelyn's car. High ceilings that made you feel small. Official seals on the walls, flags in the corners. Everything calculated to remind you that you were nothing and they were everything. 5 members of the State Board of Nursing disciplinary panel sat on one side of the table. Evelyn sat alone on the other side, like a defendant in a trial, which she supposed she was. She wore a conservative suit, navy blue, white blouse, the closest thing she owned to professional attire. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun, no jewelry, no makeup. She looked exactly like what she was, a middle-aged woman facing the end of her career and possibly her freedom. The chairperson was Patricia Lawson, 63 years old, former director of nursing at Cleveland Clinic, severe glasses perched on a sharp nose, hair pulled back in a bun so tight it looked painful. The kind of person who valued rules above all else because rules created order and order created safety, and safety was the highest virtue. The kind of person who would never understand that sometimes saving a life means breaking the rules. Ms. Thorne, Lawson began, adjusting her microphone with precise movements, we are here to determine if your actions on the morning of November 16th constituted a gross violation of your scope of practice as a registered nurse in the state of Ohio. The charges are severe: practicing medicine without a license, performing invasive surgical procedures without authorization, insubordination to a physician. Do you understand the charges? Yes, ma'am. Let the record show that the patient, Mr. Ryan Grant, survived. However, outcome is not our primary concern here. Process and legality are what matter. The law exists for a reason. Lawson consulted her notes. We will hear from witnesses. Then you will have an opportunity to speak. Then we will render judgment. Do you have any questions? No, ma'am. Very well. We'll begin with the first witness. The door opened. Bethany Frost walked in. She looked uncomfortable in a way that went beyond nervousness, kept smoothing her skirt, fidgeting with her hair, wouldn't make eye contact with Evelyn. Guilt radiated off her like heat. Ms. Frost, Lawson said, please describe what you witnessed on the morning in question. Bethany swallowed, looked at Evelyn, then looked away. Ms. Thorne had always been very quiet. She kept to herself, didn't really talk to anyone. That morning, when the patient came in, she tried to tell Dr. Sterling something about the diagnosis. He told her to be quiet. Then the patient coded, flatlined, and Ms. Thorne she grabbed a needle and stabbed it into his chest. It was terrifying. I thought she was having some kind of breakdown, some kind of psychotic episode. Did she appear to know what she was doing? I don't know. It happened so fast. One second she was in the corner. The next she was at the bedside with a needle in her hand. It was like watching someone else take over her body. Thank you, Ms. Frost. You may step down. Bethany walked past Evelyn's chair. As she passed, she whispered, I'm sorry, so quietly that only Evelyn heard it. Evelyn said nothing, just watched her go. The second witness was Dr. Garrett Sterling. He looked terrible, haggard, like he hadn't slept in 2 days. Probably hadn't. Dark circles under his eyes, suit wrinkled, hair not quite perfect. The weight of what he'd done was catching up to him. "Dr. Sterling," Lawson said, "did you authorize Nurse Thorne to perform a needle thoracostomy on Mr. Grant?" "No, I did not." A murmur went through the panel. Heads nodded. Notes were written. "Did you attempt to stop her?" "Yes. I ordered her to leave the trauma bay. I told her explicitly not to touch the patient. She disobeyed a direct order from the attending physician." "And why did you stop attempting to prevent her actions?" Sterling was quiet for a long moment. He stared at his hands, at the table, at the ceiling, anywhere but at the panel members. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost inaudible. "Because if I had stopped her, Mr. Grant would be dead right now." He looked up, met Lawson's eyes. "And because, frankly, she was doing a better job than I could have done. She saw what I missed. She acted when I froze. She saved a life that I was about to lose through my own incompetence." The room went completely silent. Lawson's face had gone red. "Dr. Sterling, are you saying that her violation of protocol was justified?" "I'm saying that in a crisis situation, which that ER absolutely was, the normal rules become guidelines. She had the training. I didn't. She had the experience. I didn't. She had the courage to act. I didn't." Sterling's voice grew stronger, more confident, like he was finally saying something he should have said days ago. "You can strip her license if you want to follow the letter of the law, but you'd be punishing a hero for being heroic. You'd be punishing someone for having the skill and courage to save a life when the people with the proper credentials failed." Lawson's lips pressed into a thin line. "Thank you, Doctor. You may step down." Sterling stood. As he passed Evelyn's chair, he stopped, turned to look at her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "for everything, for the way I treated you, for firing you, for filing this complaint. I was wrong about all of it." Then he was gone. Lawson turned her attention to Evelyn. Her expression was cold, disapproving, the expression of someone who had already made up her mind. "Ms. Thorne, your military background is impressive. We've all read your file. But you are a civilian nurse now. You cannot simply decide when the rules apply to you and when they don't. You put the hospital at immense risk. You undermined the physicians. You exceeded your scope of practice. This is cowboy medicine, and we cannot tolerate it in a modern healthcare system." Evelyn leaned forward toward the microphone. When she spoke, her voice was calm, clear, the voice of someone who had testified at 100 after-action reviews and knew how to speak truth to power. "With all due respect, Chairperson Lawson, when a 32-year-old man is dying from a tension pneumothorax, the virus of bureaucracy is more deadly than the condition. I didn't undermine the physician. I assisted him by doing what he couldn't do in that moment. I didn't put the hospital at risk. I prevented a death on their premises that would have been far worse for them. If acting to save a life when I have the skill to do so makes me a cowboy, then I guess I need to buy a hat, because I'd make the same choice again." Lawson's face went from red to purple. "Your insolence will not help your case, Ms. Thorne. The evidence is clear. You violated multiple regulations. You put your judgment above that of a licensed physician. I am recommending immediate and permanent revocation of your nursing license." The other board members nodded in agreement. It was unanimous. It was over. Evelyn closed her eyes. She had saved 2 lives in the past 48 hours, and it was going to cost her everything: her license, her career, possibly her freedom if they decided to press criminal charges. But at least Ryan Grant and Caleb Mitchell were alive. That had to count for something. Then came the knock. Not a polite knock, a military knock. 3 sharp raps that commanded immediate attention. The heavy oak doors at the back of the conference room didn't just open. They were opened with authority, purpose. 2 Navy Shore Patrol officers in dress blues stepped inside. perfect uniforms, white gloves. They held the doors open. Through them walked a man in full Navy dress uniform. 62 years old, silver hair cut short, chest covered with ribbons and medals that told the story of a career spent in service. 4 stars on his collar that marked him as one of the most powerful men in the United States military. Admiral Lawrence Thorne, Judge Advocate General of the United States Navy, and Evelyn's uncle. Every person in the room stood, not because they wanted to, not because they chose to, because the presence of a 4-star admiral demanded it. Even Lawson, who had been mid-sentence, stopped talking and stood. The admiral walked to the table with measured steps. His shoes clicked on the marble floor with military precision, each step deliberate, each step a statement. He carried a leather briefcase. Expensive, well-worn. He didn't look at the board members, didn't acknowledge them. Simply walked to the table and set the briefcase down. He opened it, pulled out a binder. Thick, heavy, official. Stamped across the cover in red ink were 3 words. Top secret. No foreign. He slammed it onto the table in front of Lawson. The sound echoed like a gunshot, like a judge's gavel, like the end of something and the beginning of something else. "Madam Chairperson," the admiral said. His voice was deep, commanding. The voice of a man who had argued cases before the Supreme Court and won. "I am Admiral Lawrence Thorne, Judge Advocate General of the United States Navy. I am here because this hearing involves classified naval warfare methodology and personnel under my jurisdiction." Lawson stared at the binder like it was a bomb. What is this?" "That," the admiral said, pointing at Evelyn without looking at her, "is the service record of Senior Chief Evelyn Thorne. 22 years of exemplary service, 3 combat deployments with Naval Special Warfare Development Group. And the document you are looking at is the Thorne Protocol for far-forward resuscitation of non-compressible hemorrhage." He leaned over the table, imposing, intimidating, a man who had sent other men into combat and brought them home. "You are accusing her of practicing cowboy medicine without a license. I am here to inform you that she wrote the licensing exam for that specific procedure. The technique she used to save Mr. Grant's life isn't rogue. It isn't improvised. It is the current standard of care for naval special warfare medics operating in austere environments. It's classified because we don't want our enemies knowing how good we are at keeping our people alive." He paused. Let that sink in. Let them understand the magnitude of their mistake. Lieutenant Mitchell was on active duty when he was injured. The moment his team entered Mercy Valley Hospital, that ER became a forward operating base under military jurisdiction. Senior Chief Thorne was the ranking medical officer on site for that specific injury. She wasn't acting as a civilian nurse. She was reactivated by Commander Kane under Article 9 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice due to extreme exigency. The admiral looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn, daring anyone to challenge him. "So you have 2 choices, Chairperson. You can continue this farce, revoke her license, and I will have this entire board subpoenaed to testify before a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing on why the state of Ohio is interfering with national security assets and preventing the military from accessing critical medical personnel during emergencies." Another pause, calculated, perfect. "Or you can recognize that extreme circumstances require extreme competence. Dismiss these charges with prejudice, and let this woman go back to doing what she was born to do, saving lives. The choice is yours, but choose quickly, because my patience is not infinite." The silence was absolute. Lawson looked at the binder, at the admiral, at Evelyn, at the other board members, who were all very carefully not making eye contact. The bureaucratic wall had just been hit by a cruise missile, and there was nothing left but rubble. Then the doors opened again. "Doctor." Sterling walked back in, not in his white coat, in a civilian suit. He looked nervous but determined, like a man who had made a decision and was going to see it through no matter what. "Excuse me," he said, his voice cracked slightly. "May I speak?" Lawson, still reeling, could only nod. Sterling approached the table, stood beside the Admiral, looked at the panel. Chairperson Lawson, members of the board. My name is Dr. Garrett Sterling. I'm the physician who filed the complaint against Ms. Thorne. He took a deep breath. And I'm here to withdraw it, completely and unconditionally. And to tell you the truth, I should have told days ago. His voice grew steadier as he spoke. 14 years ago, I applied to the military medical program, Navy. I wanted to be a flight surgeon. I was accepted into the program based on my academic credentials. Top of my class at Harvard, perfect scores on every exam. On paper, I was perfect. He paused, swallowed. But during the field training simulation, I panicked. We had a training scenario with simulated casualties under simulated fire. Fake blood, blank rounds, pyrotechnics, nothing real, nothing dangerous. And I froze. Completely. I couldn't function. I was removed from the program, not because of my grades, not because of lack of skill, but because I couldn't handle the pressure, because when it mattered, I wasn't strong enough. His voice cracked again. I've spent the past 6 months treating Evelyn Thorne like garbage, humiliating her in front of staff, making her life hell. And I did it because I was jealous, because she has the courage that I don't, because she can do things under pressure that I never could, because she makes me look like exactly what I am, a doctor who's good at taking tests but bad at saving lives when it really counts. He looked directly at Evelyn, met her eyes. When I fired her, it wasn't because she was wrong, it was because she was right. And I couldn't handle that. I couldn't handle being shown up by someone I'd convinced myself was beneath me. Tears were running down his face now. If you take her license, you're not punishing someone who broke the rules. You're punishing someone who saved 2 lives when no one else could. You're taking away from the world someone who makes it better just by being in it. Someone who's forgotten more about emergency medicine than I'll ever know. Sterling stepped back. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for your time. He turned and walked out. The doors closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of an era. Lawson sat down slowly. She looked shell-shocked, defeated. She glanced at the other board members. None of them would meet her eyes. She picked up her gavel, held it for a moment, then brought it down. In light of new evidence regarding jurisdiction and emergency protocols, she said, her voice tight and controlled, the board moves to dismiss all charges against Evelyn Thorne. The suspension is lifted immediately. Her nursing license is restored to full active status. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel fell again. Final. It was over. The board members filed out quickly, eager to escape, eager to forget this had ever happened. Evelyn sat alone at the table, staring at nothing, processing. The Admiral walked over, stood beside her, put a hand on her shoulder. You okay, kid? Evelyn looked up at him. I didn't know you were going to do that. I didn't know I was going to have to. Commander Kane called me as soon as he heard about the hearing, told me what happened, told me you were being railroaded by bureaucrats who couldn't find their ass with both hands and a map. He squeezed her shoulder gently. Your mother would have been proud of what you did, both at that hospital and here. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. Her mother, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Thorne, Navy nurse, killed in a helicopter crash in Iraq 15 years ago, the woman who had inspired Evelyn to join the service, to become a medic, to save lives. Thanks, Uncle Larry. Don't thank me. Thank Dom Kane, and thank yourself. You earned this. Now get back to work. He picked up his briefcase, walked to the door, paused. Oh, and Evelyn? Stop hiding. The world needs people like you visible, not invisible. Then he was gone. The next morning, Evelyn walked through the automatic doors of Mercy Valley Hospital for the 3rd time in 4 days. She wasn't wearing scrubs. She wore slacks and a blouse. Professional, clean. Her ID badge, newly issued overnight, hung around her neck on a lanyard. The title on the badge read, Director of Trauma Education. The ER was busy with the morning rush. But when she entered, the noise seemed to dim. People turned, looked, stared. Word had spread faster than wildfire. Evelyn Thorne was back, and not as a janitor, Bethany Frost was at the nurse's station. When she saw Evelyn, she stood quickly, almost knocking over her coffee. "Director Thorne," she said formally. Then, more quietly, "I put your schedule on the board. Your office is ready. And I wanted to apologize, really apologize, not just words. I was cruel. I was wrong. And I'm deeply sorry." Evelyn looked at her, saw genuine remorse, genuine shame, genuine desire to do better. "Thank you, Bethany. I accept your apology. Now let's get to work. And tighten your ponytail. It's dipping into the sterile field when you lean over patients." Bethany's hand flew to her hair. "Yes, ma'am. Right away." Evelyn walked past, heading toward the physician's lounge. She needed coffee, needed to start planning the new training program, needed to figure out how to fix a department that had been broken for a long time. Sterling was in the lounge, standing by the window, looking out at the rose garden. It had been replanted. New roses. Smaller. The brass plaque was gone. Removed. He turned when he heard the door. "I expected you to quit," he said. "Go back to the Navy. Or find a hospital that didn't try to destroy you. I wouldn't have blamed you." "I'm not running anymore," Evelyn replied. She poured herself coffee from the pot. Her hands didn't shake, not even a little. "Besides, this place is a mess. You need someone who knows how to handle a crisis. Multiple crises, actually." Sterling almost laughed. It was a sad, tired sound. That's the understatement of the decade. "I have conditions for staying." "I figured you would. What do you want?" "I want to completely redesign the trauma training program. Your residents are slow. They panic. They rely on technology when they should rely on clinical judgment and physical exam skills. I want to teach them the Thorne Protocol. Teach them the military approach. Teach them how to think when the world is falling apart and the equipment isn't working and all they have is their brain and their hands." Sterling looked at her, really looked at her, thought about the way she had moved during both surgeries, the efficiency, the calm, the absolute mastery, exactly what his department had been lacking for years. He extended his hand. "Done. You'll have full authority over trauma education. Whatever you need, whatever resources, budget, personnel, equipment, you report directly to me, and honestly, I'll probably just do whatever you recommend anyway because you're smarter than me and we both know it." Evelyn shook his hand. His grip was firm, honest. "One more thing," Sterling added with a hint of actual humor. "Next time a helicopter lands on the rose garden, maybe give me a heads up, just a text. That's all I ask." "No promises," Evelyn said, but she was smiling. 6 months later, the conference room in the administrative wing was full. 14 residents sat in neat rows, fresh faces, some eager, some scared, all of them listening intently to the woman at the front of the room. Evelyn stood beside a projection screen showing a chest X-ray, textbook tension pneumothorax, the kind every resident should be able to diagnose in their sleep. "In an emergency," she said, pacing slowly, "your equipment will fail. Your attending will be busy with another patient. Your protocols will be inadequate for the specific situation in front of you. The only thing you can absolutely rely on is your brain, your training, your ability to assess rapidly and act decisively. That's what separates good physicians from great ones. That's what keeps patients alive." She clicked to the next slide. A survival curve showing trauma outcomes before and after implementation of the new training protocols. 6 months ago, this ER had a survival rate for major penetrating trauma of 68%. Today, we're at 91%. That's a 23-point improvement. That's not statistics. That's people. Real people going home to their families who wouldn't have before. That's children who still have parents. Parents who still have children. That's what we do here. That's why this matters. The residents were writing frantically, taking notes, absorbing every word. There was a knock on the door. Nolan Parker stuck his head in. "Director Thorne, sorry to interrupt, but I thought you'd want to know. We just got the official notification. Joint Commission designated us as a Level 1 trauma center. First in the region. Congratulations." The residents broke into spontaneous applause. Evelyn allowed herself a small smile. "Good work, everyone. But don't let it go to your heads. A designation is just paper. What matters is what we do every single day. Now get back to your rotations. Remember, competence saves lives. Arrogance kills. Don't ever forget which one you want to be. The residents filed out. Eager, energized, better trained than they had been 6 months ago. Evelyn gathered her materials, shut down the projector. On the wall behind where she'd been standing was a framed certificate. Level 1 Trauma Center designation, Mercy Valley Hospital. And below it, in a smaller frame, a photograph. 6 people in desert fatigue standing in front of a Humvee. Marcus Cole's eternal smile. "We did it, Marcus," she whispered. "We're making a difference." Her phone buzzed. Text message. "Caleb Mitchell here. Flying again. Full duty status. Wanted to say thanks one more time. You saved my life, Senior Chief." "Lieutenant Mitchell." Evelyn typed back quickly. "Just doing my job, Lieutenant. Fly safe." Another message came through. Commander Kane. "Heard about Level 1 designation? Well done. Also heard Sterling requested transfer to outpatient clinic. Learning humility. You're good for people." Dom. Evelyn smiled, closed her phone. She walked toward her office, past Sterling in the hallway. He was carrying a box of personal items. Not many, just a few books, a coffee mug, a framed diploma. "Leaving?" she asked. "Transferring. I requested a position at the suburban clinic. Outpatient medicine. Slower pace, less pressure. Turns out I'm better suited for scheduled appointments than life or death emergencies." He looked at her. "I'm not running away. I'm finding where I fit, where I can actually help people without putting them at risk because of my limitations." "That takes courage too," Evelyn said. "Knowing yourself, being honest about your limitations. Good luck, Dr. Sterling." "Thank you, Director Thorne. And thank you for not destroying me when you had every reason to. I'm not in the revenge business. I'm in the life-saving business." They shook hands. Then Sterling walked away, toward a future that was smaller but honest, a future where he could help people without the weight of expectations he was never equipped to meet. Evelyn continued to her office, sat down at her desk, looked at the schedule for next week, training sessions, curriculum development, committee meetings. Her phone buzzed one more time. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her. "Hello? Senior Chief Thorne?" A young voice, nervous. "My name is Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez. I'm with DevGru. I'm a combat medic. And I heard about what happened, about what you did, and I just wanted to say thank you for showing us it's possible to come back, to keep serving, even after everything." Evelyn felt her throat tighten. "Where are you stationed, Lieutenant?" "Dam Neck, Training Command." "Keep learning. Keep pushing yourself. And remember, the best thing about being a medic is that we don't have to wait for permission to save lives. When someone needs us, we act. That's who we are." "Yes, ma'am." "Thank you, ma'am." The line went dead. Evelyn sat back in her chair, looked around her office, at the certificates on the wall, at the training manuals on the shelf, at the photograph of her team from 22 years ago. She had spent 14 years trying to disappear, trying to be invisible, trying to forget. But you can't forget who you are. Not really. It just waits. Patient, until the moment you're needed. The intercom crackled. "Trauma alert. ETA 3 minutes. Multi-vehicle accident. 4 critical patients. All hands on deck." Evelyn stood, grabbed her stethoscope, headed for the door. In the hallway she passed the new residents. They fell in step behind her, following, learning. "Let's go," she said. "Show me what you've learned." And they moved, together, confident, trained, ready, exactly as she had taught them. The automatic doors opened. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. The gurneys rushed in, the organized chaos of emergency medicine at its finest. And Evelyn Thorne, 58 years old, warrior medic, legend, did exactly what she was born to do. She saved lives. one patient at a time, forever. This is the story of Evelyn Thorne. They called her useless, invisible, a liability. She proved them spectacularly wrong. A reminder that the quietest people are often the strongest. That you should never judge someone by their appearance or their circumstances. That competence matters more than credentials. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. Evelyn didn't just save lives, she saved herself, by finally embracing who she really was. Sometimes the most important battle isn't against an enemy. It's against the lie that we're less than we are, that we should stay small, stay quiet, stay invisible. Evelyn Thorne refused, and in refusing, she changed everything. Not just for herself, but for everyone around her. Justice was served, competence was rewarded, the system changed for the better, and a hero got to be a hero again. The end.